Welcome everybody. I want to welcome everybody to our fifth Pathways to Adult Success COVID-19 and Social Justice Solution Forum. It's hard to imagine that our last forum we had in mid-June, and normally the summer is the sort of the down months for people, and this summer of course has been anything but. It seems like we've faced one cascading natural and man-made tragedy and disaster after another, which has done nothing but to reinforce the urgent need for us to work together to build pathways to adult success for all our students, but in particular those that have been most impacted by structural inequities, structural racism, and really years of being underserved. And as we're going to see in this discussion about how we can enable student progress through school during COVID, and really the larger moment, including the quest for social justice and the many natural disasters we're now suffering, with the fires in the West and the hurricanes in the Southeast. How we can put our heads together, that's what these solution forums are about, and do collective problem solving, collective insight, and just share what we're doing to really find a way to do this as well as we can. And I think one of the best insights I got this summer was talking to a principal who, in sort of an exasperated moment, after, and I know many of us have been through this with the schools we work with and the communities we support, after having a whole set of plans going in one way, having to then pivot the next moment and go a whole different direction with very little time. He sort of said, we just have to admit that no one knows what they're doing, but we've got to find a way to work together to make it work despite that. And I think that's where we're at right now, is none of us have the answers, but if we work together, we might be able to make some progress at least. So I want to take us through today's agenda briefly, and then really get to the meat of the work. So this is the start of the school year in a way. We're going to take a moment to acknowledge it's the fourth year of our Pathways to Adult Success Learning Community and Network. We'll just talk briefly about that. We're going to highlight the series of solutions forums we're going to have this fall. And we're going to really spend almost all our time hearing from three of the organizations and folks doing this work in the field, and really how we can really keep student progress going during these challenging times. We're going to hear from Sarah Frazelle from the Puget Sound Education Services out in Washington. We're going to hear from Delani Linder from Degrees of Change from Tacoma, Washington, and then Jared Epler from the Philadelphia Education Foundation in Pennsylvania. And they're going to be talking about different elements of how we keep students progressing during COVID. Then we're going to announce a very exciting design challenge we're having, and we'll leave a little room at the end for some general discussion. And there'll be time for discussion after each speaker. And if you go to the next slide, those of you that have been with us before know this is how we do it. For those that are coming the first time, I'm just going to remind you that we have a large, diverse group of very knowledgeable and ready to share people on the line, from K-12, from higher ed, from nonprofits, from state departments of education, and other youth-serving organizations and policy groups. So we can hear as many people as possible. We're going to really use the chat function to communicate with each other, to share your ideas, your insights, to share a resource. We may call upon you if you're willing to elaborate on a comment you made in the chat box, in which case we'll ask you to unmute yourself and respond. And then we'll follow up after this with the resources and things that were shared during our time together. All right, next slide. So I just want to take a moment to just center what the fourth year of the Pathways to Adult Success Learning Community and Network means. This is really the fourth year of an effort to bring together the folks from K-12 and higher ed and nonprofits and the workforce that are working in different parts of that pipeline, right? From the middle grades or upper elementary grades through high school, into post-secondary, from post-secondary, into and beyond, right? And recognize that we have to bring our kids all that way now, right? It's not just any one section is enough, but it's that whole pathway. And that historically and currently, there's not equitable outcomes and access to those pathways and access to those supports that needed to succeed in those pathways. And really we're about working together to try to improve upon that. So far we have over 100 and 250 folks of different organizations participating and growing, and we're an open forum. Anyone that wants to join can join. For people that are new and are interested, there's ways you can follow up at the end. Next slide, Amanda. One of the things we've done collectively as a group over these years was we've developed a sort of a framework to help us think about where are some ways, some high leverage points to improve the pathways to adult success. We've identified the idea of extending early warning and on track and multi-tiered support systems from a high school graduation to a post-secondary success focus. We've learned about collectively the importance of giving navigation and guidance supports to all students, really as a universal experience, not just for some, and really from upper elementary through post-secondary. Everybody in this environment needs a guide, needs some support. It's very hard to figure out your pathway on your own. Critical to all this work is cross-sector collaborations and networks, sort of integration both ways. That, you know, one of the reasons we know kids fall off pathways to adult success is there's fissures between institutions, from K-12 to higher ed, from higher ed to the workforce. Spaces that no one owns, and yet where it's easy to fall off course. So the way around that is to try to unite folks across those institutions to collaborate to make sure that those transitions and the preparations happen much more smoothly, and network so we can learn from each other. As get back to my principle, no one really has the answers, but if we all work together, we can find some. And the critical piece of data and how having common data and sets of data that we can all use seems so straightforward and simple, and yet for all of us that are doing this work, we know how far we are from that in many cases, and how essential it is. As we do this work, we're reminded, and we just have to keep refreshing to ourselves. Next slide, Amanda. That equity has to be at the forefront to really deal with the inequities that have been built up in our systems over time, and both implicit and explicit biases that are unfairly sort of holding folks from reaching their potential. Next slide. And the last really piece of our sort of theory of action comes from our late Deputy Director, Joanna Fox, who many of you know passed away unexpectedly last spring or early summer. And one of the things Joanna always tried to teach us all was that this is a big topic, a big challenge, and if you put it all together, it seems overwhelming. But if you do a piece at a time and link them together, it's much more doable. And so we really stressed, she came up with a metaphor of beads on a chain that, you know, we have to link all those beads together to have the chain, but moving from one bead to the next is true progress, and you can locate where you are and keep trying to add until you get to where you need to go. All right, with that, we can move to our, oh, sorry, I forgot this. And the last thing we wanted to share was the series of solution and social justice forums we'll be having this fall. After today's, we have one about a month from now on using data to advance historically underserved students during COVID and beyond. We're going to be hearing from folks from New Visions, National Louis University, and Ryan Reyna. About a month later, we have a focus on promoting equity during COVID-19. We're still fine-tuning who's going to be presenting, but it'll be some excellent insights from the field. And we're leaving December open because we try to keep this current to current times, and no one can know what's 3 months ahead right now. So we're gonna fill that in as we get closer to it to figure out what's most useful to talk about. And if you have ideas or focuses, please share those and let us know. All right, let's get to our topic at hand. How do we support students to progress through school during COVID-19 and all the sort of other challenges we're facing? And I'm going to just begin by just doing a little bit about what we know about the current state, and then we're going to really turn and focus to our presenters on some of the solutions that are emerging. So one thing we know came from a survey one of our partners, America's Promise Alliance, did it in the spring of 13 to 19-year-olds, where they found that 40% of them said they had been offered no social emotional support from their school during remote schooling in the spring. That a quarter was feeling disconnected from school, from adults, from classmates. A quarter said they were losing sleep, feeling more unhappy, feeling under strain. So that's a significant number of adolescents, right? We've all seen the news reports of significant numbers of kids that sort of just dropped off the map in the spring, didn't participate, often because they had to support families or help their younger siblings learn, but still led to a sense of disconnection and lack of support. We go to the next slide. We can also see that there's increased worries about just health and finances. So a lot more stress. Kids are both being disconnected and under more stress, and really in wide sweeping ways. One of the things this has led to, and is a key concern about keeping students progressing, if we go to the next slide, Amanda, is this challenge of missing students, right? You know, just think about this thing that we had the kids that were very unexpectedly thrown to remote schooling with like a few days notice and a sense that maybe it would be short term, and then suddenly it wasn't, and they never came back to school. And then everybody was counting on at least getting back to school part-time in the fall to make reconnections. And then many places where you had to pivot away from that and open virtually. And for this group of kids, right, that were disconnected in the spring, what's going to reconnect them in the fall, right, when it's still a similar situation? And so we're seeing some pretty challenging numbers emerge. I just gave one case from Flint, Michigan here that's been well documented, that they were anticipating 3,800 kids across the district. When the school year started, they were down 2,000 kids did not appear at the start. They had a strong mobilization, pretty impressive of the intensity of effort they put behind it, including socially distancedly safe home visits, and were able to find 1,200 of those 2,000 kids. So intensive outreach mattered, but it still left them 800 down, right, which is slightly over 20%, even with those efforts, are just sort of unaccounted for. So that's a real challenge to student progression. And I mean, Sarah's gonna get into this about how we get kids both to attend and be engaged, but there is this true concern of just how the schooling went from virtual as a surprise back to virtual, that it's a place where it's way too easy for kids to get lost. And then the last data point about keeping kids progressing from school, next slide, comes from really our very first, for people that attended all of them, our very first solutions forum was about supporting seniors during the spring of COVID-19. And the concerns being that for all kids, but particularly for kids that were thinking of or perhaps aiming towards community college, to lose March forward was very challenging, because that's often when sort of arrangements and working with counselors and efforts were made to get them enrolled and to make wise choices about which school or which area to attend. And suddenly the ability to do that face-to-face, and many support organizations were dependent on face-to-face encounters in schools, were gone. And we can see in some of these numbers that, and these are from the summer, right? So just let's be fair, these are just summer enrollments, so that perhaps early indicators of fall. It comes from our friends at the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, also a Pathways to Adult Success community member. And we can see that it's really among undergraduate certificates and associate degrees that there was the biggest enrollment declines, less so, and even a small uptick in bachelor's degrees. We can see at the associate degree level that there were declines across racial and ethnic groups, but highest for Black students. And at the undergraduate level, we can see there was a drop off among males, but not females. And then again, we can see that for Black students, there was declines at all levels. And that's really the only groups where that's true at all levels, and a sign of concern about a lot what's been predicted might happen given all the confluence of events of the summer. There was also an article today in the Washington Post, I don't know if you've seen, saying that in many community colleges, this is continuing into the fall with declining enrollments, some for undergraduates, though less so. There was 100,000 fewer students filling out FAFSA forms than the prior year. And a summer census report reported that families with incomes that are 75,000 were twice as likely to report that they were just deferring or not doing college plans in the spring. So we have another area of true concern here on this transition to higher ed. And two of our speakers today will be addressing solutions for this, but we can see this remains a significant and front issue challenge for us to keep working on. All right, next slide. So let's get to some solutions or some efforts to make solutions. I won't put too much pressure on our speakers. We're going to begin with Sarah Frazelle from the Puget Sound Education Service Districts out in Washington. And she's going to be speaking about some of their ongoing and emerging efforts around attendance and engagement. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Bob. So my name is Sarah Frazelle. I'm from the Puget Sound region, which is out here by Seattle. We support around 30 different districts of all different sizes, urban, rural, and I help lead the early warning indicator systems and multi-tiered systems of support in our region. Over the summer, I would say, over the spring, first let me preface, I don't have all the answers for sure. We are all learning together. And so we put together an attendance and engagement network. It was something that we kind of had in our back of our heads at the beginning before COVID. And as we were progressing through COVID, it was really becoming apparent that we needed to focus on engagement rather than just attendance. And so we pulled together a large group of folks from different sectors in the region. So we have behavioral health providers, community organizations, housing authority, parents and families, some students on the design team, school district representatives, and also juvenile court. And then this group really was tasked with defining what are some guiding principles of what we could be doing within the region, and defining 2 to 3 overarching problems of practice that really center those students and families, especially those who have been historically marginalized from opportunity, and then offer some strategies that we can test out throughout the school year as we're all returning. You want to go to the next slide, Amanda? Thank you. When we started out, it was, especially in the spring, our big focus was just do no harm in the region, which I think is still really important. But when we met as a design team, we were really thinking about, okay, let's try to see this as an opportunity. Where are some of those places that we can reimagine what school looks like? And so we spent a whole hour and a half, 2 hours of really talking through what could this look like? What do we want for our students long run? And so some of the 4 emerging things that came out were relationships between educators and students. It was one thing that some of the students had mentioned, that, they saw their teachers as humans for the first time. And that's what we were also hearing from the teachers, is that they were seeing their students as humans for the first time. And so it's kind of this breakdown of traditional hierarchies. And so we wanted to really focus on, let's continue pushing forward on that. Another piece was really connecting the relevance of the information that they're learning to future outcomes. So that was another thing that came up repeatedly. It was like, we have to learn and memorize all of these facts, but what does that do for me long run? And especially right now during an existential crisis for some folks, it's what are we doing? where is that relevant piece? And so that's another piece that we're really trying to focus on. A third area was safety and security of students. I'm sure this is true wherever you all are at too, but like really thinking through, one of the reasons why we collect attendance data is because we want to make sure that our students are safe and secure. And the fear with Bob's numbers, even of we still can't find 800 students, is what happened to those students. Is there anybody checking up on them? Are there services that we can provide? Are there connections between housing authority or community or mental health that we can really be providing for these students and families? And so that was another big piece that we're really trying to focus on. And then the fourth piece was really effective communication and collaboration across schools and resources. Right now it's very siloed. So we have lots of community-based organizations in some of our regions that can provide supports, but it's very unclear even for the district teams, the school teams, of how do we get those students connected to the resources? Where are we not doubling up efforts? So that's a fourth area that we're going to be looking at. And the whole entire idea is really motivated by, how do we create these systems, looking at the system level, not the individual student level? How do we create these systems that prepare and support our students in being engaged, showing up, so that we can actually have more racial, just and equitable school systems overall. Next slide. So one of the pieces as we're looking through this is really, what data are we looking at? So I've been working with early warning systems since about 2012, 2013. Our traditional early warning indicators are attendance, behavior, and course performance. And as we right now, what is attendance? What does that mean? And especially if we're trying to do no harm, and we know that we have some students that have to help support their families. We have a lot of families, even counselors that I've talked to in our region, they're like, okay, either my work suffers or my child's work suffers, and I have to pay the bills. So what does attendance mean in this day and age is a huge question. What is behavior? Is it how they're behaving or how they're dressing behind the camera or something different? So these are all things that we're still trying to figure out. But as we talked as the design team, we really looked at some of those. I think one of the big key pieces is engaging student voice. And I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide of just how that might look in rapid feedback cycles. I think traditionally when we look at student voice, it's been, let's take a student survey once or twice a year, right? But we need to be more proactive about it. So PERTS, they're out of Stanford, has put out the Elevate program. It's got several student voice pieces and I think some folks in Baltimore are using it as well, but it really focuses on how do we engage that student voice and use that for formative feedback. There's a whole entire resource library, so when the slides are shared, you can go to this equitablelearning.org, and that's a whole resource library that coincides with some of the questions that the PERT survey is asking, specifically around those measures, which you can read. The other piece that we're looking at, though, is what are those big attendance pieces that we can collect across our region that would be more of an apples to apples comparison. Been working with the state OSPI and trying to define what that might look like, but right now we're thinking assignment completion, logging into school platforms, and then participation and communication, all under the, we still are really trying to focus on whatever measures the schools are going to be end up going with. We really want to make sure that we're doing no harm to those students as well. And so following that also, we want to look at some data that came from last year, specifically which kids were left behind, and make sure that we have those supports and provide extra supports and extra attention, extra eyes on these students who didn't complete some of their courses. You know, if they missed a semester of English, for example, and they failed that, that's going to impact their four-year graduation rates. So really being thoughtful and mindful of what that looks like in the long run. Also looking at grade progression. And then also I had a lot of districts last year that were documenting access issues. And so making sure that we can actually close the loop on that. I know there's been a lot of computer pieces that are on back order, even hotspots. And so I think we're still trying to work through some of that. Next slide. So we have a group of districts that we will be working with, school teams that represent elementary, middle, and high school. And we will be meeting together to do some professional development across the year, and also implement these Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles so that we can have some rapid feedback, because of the data that we've previously had is not necessarily going to be very predictive of what's going on now, and it certainly doesn't catch those students who are struggling at the moment. So really trying to work with our school teams on identifying those real-time data elements. Kind of off the previous slide, some of those, but then also not just identifying those things, but what is our response to that? And so that's something that our state system is actually in the new rules that have come out. They're really trying to encourage schools and districts to look at what is your response. You know, you're getting this information in, now how do you respond to that? And so using a tiered system and really looking at that whole system level, that tier 1, and how that is impacting students. We also want to be able to use these Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles to really refine those data elements. Which ones are most useful? Which ones are giving us the most information? And then less is more. It's too overwhelming when you have too many data elements. And that was one of the beautiful things about early warning systems, is that we only had a few that we were looking at could really help us target supports for those students. Right now, as we're exploring what is most predictive, what is helpful, the most helpful to get these student supports, we really need to kind of be narrowing down our field. So my suggestion as I end this is, just as you are thinking through this, I really encourage you to pick out a few data elements that you will be using, really put that into a tiered system. I'm sure everyone has some kind of tiered school team, whether it's PBIS or MTSS. So really looking at, or an attendance team, really looking at what you have available, the teams that you have available, because I would say the other piece of this is that teachers are very overwhelmed at the moment, and we're still trying to figure out what that role is. So we can't just put that all on the teachers. The counselors are really overwhelmed as well. So any kind of existing structure, team structures that we have to kind of do this process is going to be really important moving forward.
Thank you, Sarah. Very, very, very helpful and insightful. I encourage folks to ask questions in chat or to share observations or to share their own experience with trying to build attendance and engagement in the current moment. And as we're doing that and as people are gathering their thoughts and sharing them, I do have a question, Sarah. I know it's too early, probably too early for this to happen, but I'm wondering how teacher teams are thinking about, or you're thinking about having sort of moving sort of the adapted EWS process to online, right? Where the team meetings, face-to-face was always sort of important for those team meetings at some level. And I don't know if there's been any experience yet with sort of an online teacher team meeting, or how is that going, or any insights yet?
I don't have a ton of insights. I do know that, so that was another piece that I might have forgot. We were supposed to go back face-to-face at the beginning, and then we all went virtual across the state. So we are still trying to figure that out. Even professional development and allowing time for teachers to meet is still we're still trying to figure out that piece, particularly with teacher unions and how much is too much time for the teachers to be having to meet and having to be on. So I think that is something that I will keep you updated on.
Great. We got a thumbs up on the student voice part. We have a question from Joanna Henry. I'd like to hear more about what is different for Sarah's work during COVID. Most of what she reported is my favorite stuff about RTI, but how is it working during COVID? What's changed and what's working well?
So again, we're at the very beginning process of this, but the biggest thing that we are focusing on more than I've ever focused on before is really incorporating that student voice, trying to get some pulse surveys out there where we are asking the kids, on a bi-weekly or every 3-week process of how are you feeling? Is there relevance to the work that you're seeing, or are you feeling engaged? Do you have somebody to talk to? And really working whatever those responses are back into some formative feedback for the teachers so that they can also be actively adjusting and actively identifying which students need more support. And in those questions, we'll be working with the individual schools to narrow down what questions we'll be working with, but we're thinking 3 to 5 questions at most, some of which are getting at the system level for like the teacher of like, okay, how does this work virtually? Am I actually engaging the kids? But also on that individual level to ensure there's safety and security for those students. That's just a whole new dynamic that I don't think we've had before, particularly working in this virtual space.
And have you been able to actually give a survey yet? We had a question about response rates, but I'm wondering if you've been able to actually give a survey yet.
We have not been able to. We just started like last week. So.
For sure. It's the benefits and the challenge about presenting here in early September.
Great ideas. We'll see if they work.
Right. One other thing I think is a little different than maybe some traditional approaches. If you go back 2 slides, Amanda, I think really quickly. Yeah, that you're really foregrounding a lot of sort of, I would say, more like preventive school level actions as opposed to more reactive to the data actions. You wanted to speak for a minute on that and what got you there?
Yeah, I mean, really, the first question for the design team was around what do we want for our students? What do we want this? If this really is an opportunity to reimagine what school can look like, what are those big principles that we want to focus on? And to do that, we really need to be more proactive rather than reactive, which is always something we've said in early warning, trying to get the most real-time data as possible. But really thinking through like, what are those pieces that we can respond to pretty quickly. I'm not sure if the other data at this point is, first of all, in a good enough position like that we have consistent definitions across all of our schools. So really thinking through that student voice piece and how we can respond in real time to that, because that is another piece that came out. Even yesterday, I had students talking, or families talking about how they had this teacher last year. The teacher during in person had never really responded to them or anything like that. They didn't feel connected to the teacher. Already this year, within the first 2 weeks, the teacher is responding really quick by email, and the student feels a lot more engaged and included. So there are these possibilities out here that I encourage all of us to really focus on. This is an opportunity to have that one-on-one, where I think before it was kind of could be overwhelming to just look at your classroom and try to figure out where everybody's at.
And I'm going to just ask one more, and then we're going to get to our next presenter, and we can follow up with the questions after that. From Curtis Taylor, in regards to relevance and connection to learning, are you looking at ways to incorporate culturally responsive, sustaining pedagogy? If so, how are you going about this?
Yes, so we have a whole entire branch. Our design team is now broken up across these four ideas. And one, as we're kind of trying to pull together, especially that effective communication and collaboration, is really engaging communities and parents. And so we have a lead who is going to be working specifically with different communities and groups of families from different ethnicities, and really thinking through, what does this look like? What does this feel like? And so that's also part of that student voice piece of, and parent voice. We're going to be trying to engage parents as well, and trying to figure out, where is that churches? Is it small groups that we can kind of talk to and have this conversation, because we want them to drive a lot of how we want to know at least how the education is affecting them, and really drive this change of, okay, let's be more responsive to the families and where they're at right now.
Great. All right, thank you, Sarah.
Yeah,
so we're going to now move on to our second presenter, Nalini Linder, the director of the Tacoma Completers Program from Degrees of Change from the great state of Washington and the city of Tacoma.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Yep, I'm just down the street from Sarah. And so I am the director of Tacoma Completes, which is a community-based initiative that's part of the larger Graduate Tacoma College Cradle to Career initiative. We support traditionally marginalized college students to and through college. I'm going to be representing a story that happened last spring. So I think that there might be some things, though, in terms of themes of what happened, what worked, what lessons were learned that could be applicable as you're thinking about potential solutions and ways to make use of this story. So I'm going to start just with setting stage with some context, and stay on the slide for just a minute, if you'll bear with me, and then we'll get into how the project actually worked. When the COVID restrictions closed down the K-12 schools here in March, and all folks were scrambling to figure out about the transition to virtual learning, here in Tacoma, the district was figuring out how to serve its 30,000 or so students, 2,000 of them being high school seniors. It was, of course, as we all know here on this call, quite chaotic with a lot of ambiguity. And our organization was able to meet with district leadership and find out that there was little bandwidth to be able to support seniors specifically with the post-secondary pathway planning in any kind of comprehensive way. And we were concerned because, as Bob referenced earlier in this call, that is the time when a lot of students are just starting to figure it out and really needing that in-person guidance. It's a critical time for them. So we offered to pull together a community-based rapid response, specifically focused just on that post-high planning. And at the time, we did not know exactly what that response would be, but we felt pretty confident that along with the other community partners, we could collectively figure it out. So to the theme of not knowing exactly what the answers were and trying to figure it out together. So it's worth noting there were two pieces to what was undergirding our confidence, and one was long-time working relationships with other community-based programs and local institutions. And it's all through the Tacoma College Support Network. Folks from there are here on this call, and they've been serving as a coordinating entity that encourages and supports community partnerships for years, particularly focused on the historically marginalized students. So we had a lot of resources there. The other reason we felt confident in offering is that our organization happens to have some deep expertise around technology development, and we thought that may be useful in the response itself. So the district said, sure, yes, please, we'd welcome any help. And we got to work, starting with convening a conversation about how to respond. And that was right around the time one of the first gatherings about supporting seniors in this forum came to be, and it was very alive with talking about, we have all these resources, what do you have available to help your students, how can we respond? And in our convening meeting, what we came to was that the fundamental challenge was we didn't actually know what the students needed, because we were disconnected from them and we needed to find out where they were in terms of their post-high planning. So we thought that if we knew what they needed, we could help better help them connect with resources. So figuring out what they needed was the problem that we were solving for. So now we can go on to the next slide and I'll show you how that looked. Thanks. We collaboratively designed a 5-minute online survey that local seniors could take on their phones. And what you're looking at here is the workflow of what we did with the information. We called it the What's Next TPS Senior Check-In, and I'll share with you some of the things that the survey asked. In addition to name and high school, we asked them the big questions about what was next for them as far as they knew at that time. So, do you know what you need to do to graduate high school? Prior to this closure, what plans did you have for after high school? What about right now? What are your plans? And if your plans are college, what are your top 3 choices? And what's your status in terms of applying to and getting accepted to those colleges? Then we asked, what questions do you have about the planning process itself, if you have any? And then we had drop-down response options, including I don't have any questions right now, or I need help figuring out the right college for me, or I need help with my financial aid offer, or I need help with scholarships. And they could mark all that was true for them, and they could also have a fill-in and other. So then we asked if they wanted help with these questions. And some said they didn't want help, but many said they did. So that collected this check-in data that we were initially seeking, and the next part helped with follow-up. So that's where we get to this workflow you see. The survey indicated that their answers would be shared with their high schools, and then it asked permission to share with the colleges they had named. And then it asked, are you currently in a school-based college access program? That's the SBCAP there. And about 30% or so of our local seniors are. And so if they said yes, the survey said to them, that's great, we're gonna let your program know your responses. And if they were not connected and had said they wanted help, the survey asked if they would like to be matched with a college access professional. So I'll share more about how that worked in a second. In terms of our partnership then, we vetted all of the survey questions with the different stakeholder groups and made sure the wording was accurate and equitable and strengths-based and accessible. And then we also ensured that there was clear language about the student permissions and the sharing of that data back out. So that brings us to the follow-up piece, and the next slide, please. As the students responded, every stakeholder organization that helped with the survey was given private access to this interactive dashboard. The live version allowed partners to filter by high school to see in aggregate how their students were responding. I should note that this is one of a few of the dashboards that were developed, and if anyone's interested in seeing them all, we can give you a link to a blog post written by the National College Attainment Network that went into greater depth about the technical aspects of the data collection tools. So being able to see the live data in aggregate was useful on many fronts. At a practical level, it helped with our outreach efforts because we relied a lot initially on the high school staff encouraging seniors to take this survey. And during the 6 weeks that this ran, we regularly sent out the link to high school principals in a big group email and called out the high schools whose response rates were particularly high. And that helped encourage a little bit of friendly competition and a little bit of extra outreach, and they got really creative about how to do that. The live data also provided a big picture snapshot on how the seniors were doing pre-graduation during COVID overall. So again, to an earlier point about how there was lowered engagement rates when the schools closed, That was happening here as well, and folks really felt in the dark. Folks being all of the providers and folks in the schools. So while there is some self-selection here about the students who responded, and it's not entirely a representative sample, it gave at least a general impression to answer how students were doing. So for instance, you'll see most expected to graduate, but about 1 in 5 of those who took this said they were unsure of what they needed to do next to graduate. Most who took the survey were certain about going to college, and if they had questions, it was about needing to find scholarships. And those who didn't plan to go to college anticipated working full-time. So these were important, actionable pieces of data that we were able to share back to our partners. And then, of course, in addition to the aggregate dashboards, the high schools, colleges, and college access programs were given secure access to the student level responses for their students. So staff could review those lists and follow up with individuals as needed. I'll also note here that while there was an emphasis on providing help through the complex college planning pathway, if students indicated they had questions about other pathways with an apprenticeship or joining the military, we were able to pass their names along to the appropriate partner and to see if they could help them. So we wanted a much larger response rate than just this just under 1/4% here, but 25%. But we were gratified to see what did work well. We learned a ton, and especially this piece about collaborative data collection and sharing. So if we can go on to the next slide, I'll share the other particular emphasis. So it was the students who asked for help and weren't connected to a program. They were the ones that we were most eager to connect with, and there were a lot of college access providers who were ready to do so. So we had a response built just for them. There is this great pool of seasoned staff from college access programs that offered to follow up with students. And my organization was able to use the technical development savvy it has to get an application built. So this thing, what you're looking at here is the platform. We called it the response portal, and it was just for those college access professionals to log in. Every time a student answered the survey and said, "I want help," their information was automatically connected in a database so they could be matched quickly with someone from the pool of college access staff. And the college access staff got an email saying there's a student who wants some help. The staff reached out to students. They indicated in the portal when they had done so. They recorded the students' responses, and we were able to make notes in the portal. If a staff member wasn't able to follow up or the student didn't respond, then information got sent back to the match coordinator for additional follow-up and to ensure that all the students who wanted support would get it. So that was the rapid response in Tacoma to support our seniors using both technology and a whole lot of community partnership facilitation with multiple community organizations. We learned a lot, and we're hoping to build on this to see if we can use some of these tools into the future as COVID continues, and repurposing some of these to continue to gather information if we're not able to collect it in person with seniors this year.
Thank you, Nalini. And again, let's use the chat for questions or comments or other efforts that were of a similar vein. And while we're doing that, I'll start off with a question and an observation. I think one of the very powerful things that you're learning how to do, right, is this idea of when kids don't know like where to go to get these things answered. There's a place. There is someone approaches them and asks them to do a survey, tracks them down, and then once they do that, it can help figure out where they need to go. And I think one of the great challenges we face, especially among some of our higher need students, is that many of them in certain circumstances are largely or to an extent raising themselves, or they're first generation. There's no close guidance on how to navigate things that no one else has navigated before. And absent that, putting yourself in their shoes, that if there is an outreach to say, here's a way to get connected, to get your answers, it's really hard for them to find that on their own. I mean, were they supposed to go on the web and like search community colleges? And like, we did this as an experiment. Like, if you actually just go to the web and try to get a person into community college, you've got to be incredibly skillful at navigating many screens and many, many contact sheets. It's like, it's not just simply, here's a person who'll answer your question. So I think this idea of a community response, helping figure out, we know we have 2,000 seniors, like, let's make sure we can get to as many of them as we can and give them an access point to information. May seem like a small thing, but I think it's actually a huge thing. And so you guys, I just noted one of the, I think it's sort of some good pioneering efforts in this that are very beneficial for all of us to keep learning on.
Oh, great. I really agree, Bob, and I think the kudos to a couple of the partners who are here on the call from the Foundation for Tacoma Students who while some of us were developing apps and others were sending out emails, they were working hard on the marketing piece of this and helping to encourage some creative ways. So absolutely trying to find things. One of the creative ways that the high schools responded was to use the cap and gown pickup, which was through the high school's parking lot, right? Everybody in their line of cars picking up through the window. And we had QR codes to this survey on a flyer that they called out, handed them a piece of candy and said, this is something for you to take right now. Got a big spike in responses on that day, and then word of mouth as well.
Yeah, that's really critical. Sarah was asking, is there a cost associated with this? This is fantastic.
Well, there are costs. We have been really great in finding some funders to help support this. So there's no cost to the partners or to the, is that what you mean? To the cost to partners and others to share the data?
Like if there were other districts that wanted to implement something like this, I was wondering if there's how much they should be looking at.
Right. There is, we have gotten a few questions about that, and I think the tech folks from my organization, I'm happy to talk to anybody else who's interested in figuring out how to use this. Happy to follow up with people. The software, there was, it sounded like a lot to me, of several $1,000s, but they said that in the software world, it was a very small amount to develop the app, the matching app. But I'm happy to follow up if anyone's seriously interested in those particular tools.
And then just one more observation, as I recall, when there was someone else from your organization was on an earlier call. I remember that an element of this too, I believe, was sort of getting a more of a collective collaborative effort among the local universities to get some sense of uniformity and outreach, and the universities were extending application times, they were extending various things to help with this transition. And my memory, I'm just checking, was a part of this effort was getting sort of a, not necessarily uniformity, but a shared sense of what that is. So people didn't have to go school to school to find it out.
Right. Well, I think one of the pieces that really helped with alignment for this was it was a 3-hour-long Zoom call in the middle of March or early April, which, to everybody's credit, we had college admissions folks and folks from the school district and lots of people from that Tacoma College Support Network all around the table, a lot of whom don't typically interact with each other, sharing what their responses were individually. And as we all gathered around this collective idea of how to support seniors as they're figuring out their next move, we were able to share, here's our calendar schedule, here's what we're working on. And it was in those conversations that some alignment, it made sense to better align and know what the messaging is. And the Tacoma College Support Network was working on some of that on the side anyway, because that kind of alignment to the messaging is so important.
Right. But that's just a very powerful example of one of the key pathways to adult success ideas of cross-sector collaboration and building local efforts to create more seamless pathways for their kids. So that's, I think, just outside of COVID, it's another very nice example of that. So with that, I'm going to turn to our third presenter from the Philadelphia Education. Is it Fund or Foundation, Jared? Jared Epler from the TRIO Access Program.
Good afternoon, everybody. A little bit of context about the Philadelphia Education Fund before we get started. Across all of our student-facing programs, we serve approximately 3,700 students a year in grades 9 through 12, and that's across 16 different public and charter schools in the city. But we also have a last dollar scholarship program. So through that program, we're offering about $700,000 in scholarship money that's supporting 130 students who are currently and actively enrolled in college. So if you want to advance to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more specifically about a collaborative effort between us, the Summer Search, and Philadelphia Futures. So back in March, when we first realized that we would be moving to remote work, I think we first approached this thinking about equity and issues in access. Before we even started a conversation about how we would be serving students with our college access programming, we were really thinking about that first layer of how do we ensure that basic needs are met, and knowing that that was important so that we could move to the next layer of continuing to provide those services. So we decided to come together with two other organizations and start to pull resources together, because we very quickly noticed that there were a lot of emails going around, and it felt very overwhelming to see all of the links and the resources, but also realizing that all independent organizations were going to be doing some layer of this work on their own, trying to pull those together and share those with their students. And then quickly we also realized, what is it like to be a student in this moment, receiving this information, and how incredibly overwhelming to navigate anything from, I don't have internet at home, how am I going to continue to get my free and reduced price lunch? So we really put ourselves in that mindset as we approach the work. And I think at times we can all be kind of focused on our group of students, right? We were three very different nonprofit organizations all doing college access work, but united by this idea that we're all here to serve students. So why not pull resources together and create one really robust place, not just for high school students, but for college students and for the college access practitioners in Philadelphia. And again, thinking we want to take this a step beyond college access, right? We want to be thinking about all of the things that not only a student, but also what would a family be needing right now to make sure that students are set to go to virtual class, to be able to learn virtually, to make sure that their utilities are able to remain on. And what does that look like? What happens when maybe a family member loses a job? And really thinking of it as holistic support, right? What are all of the different topics that could come up? And then how do we transform that into something that's more robust for our entire city as a one-stop shop that, again, is super user-friendly, family-friendly, student-friendly, that we should be sharing that out. And what this blossomed into was also this leadership roundtable, bringing program directors from these three nonprofits together, which we continue to meet now and talk a lot about best practices and what are you doing in terms of delivering virtual content to students as well. And that's been one of the really great benefits of this project. But I want everyone to get a chance just to kind of see what that resource looks like. So Amanda, if you can go to the next slide, I have a short video walkthrough that I'll just kind of explain the resource. So we decided to leverage a website that we already have ownership of, which is Philly Goes to College, and to house it there. So you can see that there are three different buckets. We looked at high school students, current college students, and thinking about practitioners. And we generated a really long list of questions, thinking as a student and breaking those into categories. What are some basic needs? What are the links to those resources? How am I going to approach online learning and figure out what that looks like? What if I am providing care for my siblings and helping them with online learning? What does that look like? And then doing the same for current college students. We, again, are supporting students through our scholarship program, thinking about self-care. How do I continue to engage in remote learning for college? We had students who didn't have laptops, so finding ways to connect them to that technology. And then finally, very specifically, what resources could we provide to other college access counselors as well to ensure that they had some resources and had some of their own needs met too. And what we did then is really start to present this in different spaces. There's a really great roundtable in Philadelphia of college access practitioners. So we would present it on those calls and then turned that into a virtual or a digital form where other organizations could actually send in resources that they found really helpful to make this more of a living document, something that we can continue to update this fall as well, and to share out with people too. So that's how its reach became a little bit further than we even intended, I think, to really get it out there to lots of people. And then what blossomed from this, again, and I mean, if you can go to the final slide, again, thinking about layer one, we have to focus on basic needs, but two is now how do we start delivering the services to our students? And that really came through a website that we designed called College Access Online, and using social media. So we created basically a blog that was categorized into different themes, and took two of our student-facing teams, our College Access program and our Gear Up program, and providing all of the resources and counseling that we would be providing in schools, and breaking that into a weekly calendar and sharing that out. And the great thing about this resource is it linked right to this resource guide that we created, but we found that this started to be shared with other college access organizations. We met students where they are, which was social media. So building an Instagram page that we actually didn't have at all, and doing a lot of our workshop programming as Instagram live chats. So we did a chat with our local community college representative on Instagram Live because we knew that's where students were, right? And then using Instagram to drive students back to this other new website, to be in touch with us, to see recorded webinars, and that this can now live on. And our goal in all of this was we wanted to create something that had a shelf life beyond COVID-19, right? We didn't want to just put a Band-Aid on something, but build something that we can continue to use when we do return to our one-on-one in-person counseling in our schools. But this would be a great supplemental resource to that. So this is something we're expanding on this fall, and revisiting that COVID guide to make sure we're including newer resources, more updated resources, to make sure that students are able to access higher ed in the same way that their higher income peers are, because we knew that COVID-19 was going to be quite an obstacle for students who are already facing access issues. So we can, that's kind of our quick overview. I can open it up for questions too. I realize we're almost right at 3.
No, we're fine. This actually, we go to 3:15, so we're fine. So I'm gonna, please put your questions or observations or additional resources or ideas in the chat, and I'll kick it off. Just 2 questions. One, I'm curious if you've got a, because you're both dealing with high school students and college students, is their main question the same, or are high school questions asking or searching more for a certain type of assistance or question versus college students? What have you learned about what their sort of primary things they're looking for are?
Yeah, I think that both, if you look closely at both of those pages, a lot of the resources for current college students are duplicates of what high school students were asking as well, because so many of the students we were supporting were returning home from being away at college, and assuming the role of, again, being a caretaker for a family. So there was a lot of similarity there. But I think for the college students, it was a little bit different of how am I going to advocate for myself in terms of continuing my college classes? What happens in the college world when I don't have access to internet, and how might that be different than what I'm facing in high school? And then a lot of the high school resources were college access specific as well, right? So there were FAFSA walkthroughs, and more resources that were anchored in what's the process that I need to complete this year. And that was a little bit different from, again, what the college students were asking for and needing.
Great, thanks. And then it seems so easy. These 3 groups came together and we pooled resources, and we were not duplicative. Do you think that was like a sort of COVID, driven by COVID, make that cooperation more likely to happen? Or do you think it would have happened in normal times?
I think it's a mix of a few things. I think it was definitely, we all felt very overwhelmed in that first week. And this was a very quick initiative. We had this idea, I think, on the day that we all moved to remote work. And I think that there was a feeling of feeling a little bit isolated, but knowing you had a community to be able to help. Full disclosure, I used to work at Summer Search, so I was really connected to the person there, and had recently been at some trainings with Philadelphia Futures, and they just seemed also like very natural collaborators on the project. So I think that COVID definitely pushed us together, but I think it was a very welcome collaboration to not feel like one organization had to carry that weight.
Great, thanks. So if people have questions, let's ask them, or if you want to, you go obviously follow up later. I'll just give it one more minute and then we'll move to our close. All right, if, Amanda, if you could take us, just we have two quick resources to share and our design challenge. So just one of our partners, learning community partners, Talent Development Secondary. For people who want to go deeper into this idea of adapting early warning systems and MTS systems and on-track or RTI systems to COVID, they're going to be having a 4-webinar series this fall, looking at things again like attendance and engagement and post-secondary students, but also social emotional and how we can organize adults to sort of do this work. So that's just FYI for people that want to dig deeper. On our next slide, I just want to show people that the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center is putting out much more frequent enrollment reports because of COVID. For those that are really interested in getting a pulse on what's happening at the post-secondary enrollment thing, their next report is actually due out on the 24th. They got pushed back a little bit. And then you can see they're planning to come out with monthly reports, which is different than they normally do and people might be used to. So that's just an FYI for those that want to keep on track of what's happening with our post-secondary enrollments in sort of real time. And the last thing we're going to bring up is an exciting new development for the Pathways to Adult Success. We're able in our current work to offer a design challenge, which we're sort of announcing today, and we'll be sending out more details to folks tomorrow. But basically the idea is to identify an unmet challenge in a critical area within the larger PASS framework that we've all been working to develop, from early warning systems, post-secondary success, navigation guidance for all post-secondary, cross-sector collaboration, shared data. Basically looking for folks that, who are proposing and testing a solution, as we had 3 excellent examples today. Those would all be great examples for a design challenge application. And the goal would be obviously to do this, to share, to both share findings with some of the other folks in the design challenge and then collectively with the whole learning community. And we'll be able to give very, very, very modest stipends to help with this, but also some thought partnership and sounding boards from the greater EGC team. So it's a rapid turnaround, but we're creating a very simple application. Less is more. And just to sort of stay tuned, details will be coming tomorrow and as a follow-up to this webinar. And with that, I want to bring us to a close and really thank our three guests today, giving really great examples from the field of how collectively we can start pushing back against these challenges we're facing and finding ways to work together to build pathways to adult success for the students who need them the most and been least able to get them in the past, and to keep helping each other do that hard work and share our insights and our collective insights. So we really look forward. We thank them for today and for kicking off our fall series, and we look forward to continuing this throughout the fall. But again, I want to thank them for really just the fantastic work they're doing locally, but with really national implications and significance. We'll be sending out, as usual, a recording of the session, a copy of the slides, the list of references. We all deeply appreciate Amanda for her wizardry in putting that all together in a very beautiful and easily accessible way. And we say, as always, be well, thank you, and onwards. Good day.
Thank you.